All right, folks, so what I want to talk about today is what everyone's talking about, of course, the Princeton study. So I made a lovely chart, visual explanation, if you will, on a whiteboard because that's how my ADHD brain works best. So I want to talk generally and then I'm going to get specifically into the categories. So, first off, what is the point of this study? Does this really tell us anything new? Is it even really helpful? Well, maybe. So it does explain some potential future directions as far as how to assess for autism in a more specific way that more so ties to the particular needs and interventions of the child being assessed. So, an extensive history, thorough behavioral observations, as well as specific autism measures and many autism measures as opposed to just one or two. And next, we learned that genetic testing can actually be really important. Now, that's complicated too because you have to be really specific. There's many genetic tests available that range from testing for a few disorders to hundreds. So this is all relevant because basically what they did, albeit with not the most diverse sample, so we're talking mostly male, mostly white, and no adults. So this sample, even though it's a little bit skewed, they were able to essentially isolate the gene expression. And from there, they were able to create these 4 subtypes of these particular gene clusters looked like behaviorally. So we have the moderate challenges group, and this one has some mild social communication weaknesses, some repetitive behaviors, maybe some other quote unquote atypical behaviors, no developmental delays, and they usually have a diagnosis a little bit later. Less essential genes are affected. This category also has more females, still predominantly male, but as compared to the other 3 categories, there's more females. And again, these aren't subtypes, so to speak, but just to make it make sense a little bit, especially for us psychologists who keep going from, diagnostic label and category to diagnostic label, it's kind of relatable to a level 1 profile. Then on the other extreme, you have the broadly affected. These usually are de novo gene mutations, so a newer, novel, non-inherited gene mutation. These are the children that typically have the most difficulties as far as intellectual, social, emotional, and motor skills, as well as delayed language. And this is usually what they call high impact mutations. And so these children and adults are most similar to what we might think of as a level 3 potentially. My thought is that this would likely include Fragile X, Williams syndrome, Angelman syndrome, cerebral palsy, significant birth injuries, and things of that nature. Then in the middle, we have the most variability. We have kind of what I'm calling level 2A and level 2B. Again, it's not that clear. I'm just trying to simplify for those of us who are just trying to digest this initially. So you have the mixed ASD and developmental delay, and then you have the social behavioral group. The biggest difference between those 2 groups are that the social behavioral group generally does not have developmental delays, while the mixed ASD and developmental delay group does. Also, the mixed ASD group tend to have inherited, so their genetic makeup, they're diagnosed a little bit earlier. Kind of seems to overlap a lot with like a language or a learning disorder impairment. It's kind of unclear whether there's other genetic involvement too. For example, Noonan syndrome, which has a lot of these overlapping symptoms and also is inherited. And then the social behavioral group, this one, like I said, has no developmental delays. So oftentimes this group is diagnosed later on, and they have a lot of the similar mild to moderate difficulties with potentially self-injury, repetitive behavioral patterns, restricted interests, social communication weaknesses, but it looks a little bit differently genetically in terms of how and when it expresses itself. And they are more likely to have co-occurring ADHD, OCD, anxiety, and depression. And so, my thought was, because it's expressing a little bit later on, this social behavioral group, potentially what used to be called childhood disintegrative disorder or Rett syndrome, where they typically do not appear to be losing skills until toddlerhood, for example. None of this is clear cut, but it does give us a little bit of information. So this is helpful just to understand that there's many different genetic makeups and variations to autism. And they result in different strengths and weaknesses in terms of abilities, very different presentations and expectations long term, although I never like to tell anyone what their quote unquote prognosis is or what they can or cannot do. But that being said, the parent will want to understand what expectations to have for their child and how to best support them, and what their life might look like going forward. So I think this is helpful in that respect. And I think it does give us more indication in terms of, potential medications, interventions, supports that can be provided for these different, subcategories.